Welcome to Travel with Sean. I'm Sean. Today we're in Thessaloniki, Greece, traveling around looking at churches from the Byzantine era. And these churches that we're going to look at contributed to the city being named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Around the year 50 AD, the Apostle Paul visited Thessaloniki for at least 3 weeks, establishing the first Christian church here. He later wrote letters to the members of that church, which have been published in the Bible as 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. When the Roman Empire split in the 5th century, this was the wealthiest and second largest city of the Byzantine Empire. In this video, we explore some of the oldest churches in the city built during the Byzantine era. Be sure to watch to the end to see the only mosaic in the world that depicts Jesus without a beard. The first church on our tour is the Church of the Holy Apostles, the construction of which is believed to have begun between 1310 and 1314. The church was likely left unfinished for several years and was finally dedicated in the mid-18th century. Looking around inside, we quickly come to a painting encased in metal, except for the faces. This was a common practice during the Byzantine era hundreds of years ago. We can see a lot of artwork hanging on the walls. But what is most impressive to me is the artwork painted directly onto the walls. I think the big reason why the artwork painted directly onto the walls is most impressive to me is that it was painted hundreds of years ago. In this church, it was likely painted in the 15th century. That means this artwork has been here exposed to the public for 600 years, while people are in and out of here every day, worshiping and touring. When in these old churches, we also need to take note of the ceilings and the inside of the domes. Most of these churches we're going to visit are relatively small, but they're all equally fascinating. Before we go away, let's take a look around outside the church. Right nearby the church are ruins of the church that had been used prior to this one. You see right here. So that means it was built in the 12th to 13th centuries. Next to it is an even older church, likely built in the 10th to 11th centuries. The next stop on our tour is the Church of Aia Ekaterini, or the Church of St. Catherine in English. Scholars have estimated that it was built in the 14th century, no later than 1330, and that it was converted into a mosque sometime between 1480 and 1510. Historians and archaeologists believe that an older church was incorporated into the construction of this one, and that it was probably part of a monastery, but they're not sure what it was called. It is considered to be the most unknown church in the city, and we couldn't get in because they closed early that day. My research indicated that the church would close at noon and reopen at 5. However, we got here a quarter after 11, and the gates and doors were closed. A woman walking by told us it would reopen at 5, so I guess they closed at 11. The Church of Saint Demetrius was built in the early 7th century on the former site of a Roman bath, where Saint Demetrius was said to have been held prisoner and executed. A Roman well was also discovered on this site, where soldiers dumped the saint's body after he was executed. The first church was built here on this site in the 4th century, shortly after Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion. Centuries ago, it was common for churches to have a separate building for baptism, which was called the baptistry. It's quite likely then that the Church of St. Demetrius had one, and that this baptismal font came from there, which would indicate that it is several centuries old, possibly going back to the 7th century. Don't know that for sure. I can tell you for sure, though, who was buried here. Nobody. This is only a ceremonial grave for Saint Demetrius. Okay, now that we've explored the outside, let's go take a look inside the church. One of the first things we notice upon walking in is this old painting, which likely was painted prior to the fire of 1917. It looks very old, and it is likely the image of Saint Demetrius. Historically, the church featured significant frescoes and mosaics from the 6th and early 7th centuries, some of which were located in and around the apse. That's that semi-dome area behind the altar that's usually painted. However, due to various events over the centuries, including fires and reconstructions, the original apse mosaics have not survived. The current decoration of the apse is a result of modern restoration works. This long white structure is known as the iconostasis, which is typical in Orthodox churches and aligns with the chancel screen that used to be prominent in English churches before the Reformation. Before we entered, I called this a huge church. Now you can get a feel for what I was talking about. This crypt inside the church contains the remains of Saint Demetrius, who was martyred here in 306 AD. His remains were brought here after Thessaloniki was liberated from the Turks in 1912. The current basilica was constructed as a rare 5-aisle church. There are only 6 known 5-aisle churches in all of Europe, and of them, there are only 2 that I have not yet visited. Our next stop is the Church of Panagia Chalkeon. The name of this 11th century Byzantine church means the most holy Virgin of the coppersmiths. Although that's quite a mouthful, its name comes from this being the neighborhood where the city's coppersmiths lived back in the 11th century. Although it was closed for restoration work, there is a plaque inside indicating that the church was dedicated in the Byzantine year 6537, which translates to the year 1028 AD. It also says that it was dedicated by a man named Christopher, who is from a region that nowadays corresponds with Italy. It was built of red bricks, giving it the common nickname, the Red Church. The Church of Panagia Achiropiitos is known in English as the Church of the Most Holy Virgin, not made by human hands. Based on its bricks and mosaics, it's believed that the church was built in the mid to late 5th century, making it one of the oldest churches in the city. It was built over Roman baths. During the Byzantine era, the church was called Church of Panagia Theotokos, or the Church of the Most Holy Virgin, Mother of God. Its current name has been in use since 1320 and comes from a painting of Mary holding baby Jesus, and the painting was called the Most Holy Virgin Who Shows the Way. And it was believed that the painting was made not by human hands. Sadly, that painting disappeared while the city was under Muslim control from the 15th century into the 19th century. Notice all of the columns? The church has 24 marble columns on the ground floor alone, and you can see there are many on the second floor also. Beneath the glass on the floor, we can see the original mosaic flooring from the 5th century. I said before that this is one of the oldest churches in Thessaloniki, built in the 5th century, but it is also one of the largest. I think second only to the Church of Saint Demetrius. That was the five-aisled church. Now we come to Hagia Sophia, or in English, the Church of Holy Wisdom. It was built over the ruins of the five-aisled Basilica of St. Mark that collapsed during an earthquake in 620 AD. Construction took 40 years, from 690 to 730, and it was modeled after the Hagia Sophia, or properly pronounced Hagia Sophia, located in Istanbul, Turkey, which was then Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. And it's important to note that this church was the cathedral church of Thessaloniki until 1524, when it was converted into the Hagia Sophia Mosque. And the Muslims continued to control the city and the church until 1912, when the city was liberated and the church returned to Christian worship. This church was one of the most important buildings in medieval Thessaloniki. Its interior was badly damaged during a fire in 1890 and most recently restored between 1908 and 1910. The dome's restoration wasn't completed until 1980. This little chapel is dedicated to St. Basil. He was born in Athens in the early 9th century, became a monk in 857 AD, and in 904 AD he became the metropolitan, like the Archbishop of Thessaloniki. His casket and remains were discovered buried behind one of the lecterns in the church. They were reburied behind the altar table and in 1994 moved to this chapel dedicated to him that was built to display his casket. Walking out the front door, we get a beautiful view of the church's large courtyard. Looking at the side of the church, we can see some ruins, possibly from the Basilica of St. Mark that collapsed in 620 AD. Here is a view of the rear of the church that helps us see that the church was built in the shape of a cross. Hagios Panteleimon, or Church of Saint Panteleimon in English, was probably built around the end of the 13th century, or possibly even the very early 14th century. No one is certain, but some scholars believe that it was even built prior to the 12th century. Nobody knows. What we do know is that it was dedicated in 1912 to the 4th century martyr who is known for his compassion and miracles. He even survived being boiled in oil and still refused to denounce his Christian faith. The church's original name is also unknown, but in 1548 it was converted into the Mosque of Isaac. Some historians argue that its name indicates that it was originally part of the monastery of Cure Isaac, named after the man who was the city's metropolitan from 1295 to 1315. Others argue that the mosque was named after the municipal judge at the beginning of the 16th century. You can see that there wasn't any artwork painted on the walls inside this church. On either side of the church is a chapel, originally part of a three-sided portico that surrounded the church. They are all that remain of that portico. The structure in front of the church that looks like a baptismal font was built by the Muslims for ritual purification, which is required before performing prayers in the mosque. So it was built between 1584 and 1912. The Holy Church of Saint Nicholas Orphanos is believed to have been the church for a monastery in the early 14th century. The church is dedicated to Saint Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors, children, and the poor. The word Orphanos is believed to refer to an orphanage or charitable institution that may have been associated with the church. Some historians say that the use of the word Orphanos is meant to portray Saint Nicholas as protector of orphans and the needy. All of these wall paintings we see were completed between 1310 and 1320. Now, some believe the church was built by Serbian king Stefan Uroš II, who died in 1321. They believe this because, one, he is known to have sponsored several churches in the city. Two, there's an image of St. George Gorgos, the king's patron saint. And three, there's also an image of St. Clemens of Ohrid, who was a popular theme in Serbian churches. Peeking behind the curtain, we can see the priest preparing for Eucharist. The churchyard is laid out like a park. Let's take a look around back. Moving along, we come to the church of Osios David, meaning Venerable David. It was built in the late 5th century and was later used as the monastery church for Vlatadon Monastery. It was dedicated to David the Tree Dweller, a local monk who lived in the 5th century. A 9th century monk named Ignatius wrote a history in which he recalled that the church was built by Theodora, the daughter of Emperor Maximian, who was a persecutor of Christians. Theodora became a Christian in secret and asked her father to build a house and a bathhouse. She converted the bathhouse into a church and decorated it with a mosaic, which she covered with the skin of an ox and mortar, so that no one would expose her secret. Theodora's secret mosaic is likely this 5th century icon of Jesus without a beard. Mind you, this is the only mosaic in the world that depicts Jesus without a beard. The mosaic was discovered in the 1920s after the church was converted back to Christian worship following 4 decades of being a mosque. Our last stop is Vlatadon Monastery. It's the only Byzantine monastery still operating in Thessaloniki. It was founded in the second half of the 14th century by two monks who were disciples of the Archbishop of Thessaloniki. The church was built over the ruins of an earlier church, and it was built on the site of the house of a man named Jason, who was an early Christian convert and provided lodging and refuge for the apostles Paul, Silas, and Timothy in 50 AD. The Bible tells in the book of Acts how some locals were upset with Paul's preaching and went to Jason's house looking for him. But since Paul wasn't there at the time, they brought Jason to the city authorities. Over the centuries, many reconstructions and additions have been made to the monastery. Today, the only thing that remains from the original Byzantine monastery is the church. Inside, it is adorned with beautiful wall paintings, most of which date from 1360 to 1380. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tour of these old churches. I certainly did. I thank you for watching and appreciate your support. Until next time, bye-bye.